Deep listening.
الاستماع العميق.
Deep listening.
Intensiv zuhören.
Deep listening.
Deep listening.
深度聆听
Deep listening. Impact beyond words.
So he's coming into my office with one major idea that he's right and nobody sees what's wrong around. And just by listening, he recognized that something is wrong with him. This is very hard to own this type of thoughts. And a good listener can do that.
Hi, I'm Oscar Trimboli, and this is the Deep Listening podcast series designed to move you from an unconscious listener to a deep and productive listener. Did you know you spend 55% of your day listening, yet only 2% of us have had any listening training whatsoever? Frustration, misunderstanding, wasted time and opportunity, along with creating poor relationships, are just some of the costs of not listening. Each episode of the series is designed to provide you with practical, actionable, and impactful tips to move you through the 5 levels of listening. So I invite you to visit oscartrimboli.com/Facebook to learn about the 5 levels of listening and how others are making an impact beyond words. I'm sure everybody has a Yoda in their life, someone who's wise, someone who can say something really important in just a few words, and those words will stay with you for the rest of your life. For me, one of my Yodas is Avi, a professor of listening in all senses of the word. In this episode, Avi explores with me the obstacles to listening. And in the words of the great-grandfather of the listening movement, Carl Rogers, Avi explains that if you really, really want to listen, you need to be willing to change. In this episode, Avi spends time exploring how the listener shapes the quality of the speaker's thinking, and more importantly, backs it up with the science to prove it. Listen for the story of the manager who thinks they're an amazing people person, and yet in Avi's words, they're completely clueless to one of the difficulties for one of their staff members once they learned how to listen without judgment. Avi explains the power of stories, and when you listen to disagree, your listening moves forward dramatically. Listen out for the story where he takes us into the room to an MBA class and listen how the room fights about the concept of listening and what Avi does to help the room become conscious of what they're doing. As we kick off, we're going to ask Avi what was it like around the dinner table. And as a bit of context, he's the son of Holocaust survivors, so food matters enormously. And then we quickly talk about the IDF, or the Israeli Defense Force, and how that helped influence some of his thinking around listening, particularly when he gets access to a Hebrew translation of William Shakespeare's work. Let's listen to Avi.
Deep listening.
Deep listening. Lourdes Lassalle.
Deep listening.
Deep listening.
Deep listening. Impact beyond words.
Okay, this is a painful question for me. Dinner time or any meal time was a war zone for me. I think, well, first I'll tell what it was like for me. I was a bear eater. I was very thin. I worried my parents that I'm not thriving, although I grew at my rate and I had no physiological problems whatsoever. But they, being Holocaust survivors, they were concerned and they were trying to shove food into me, and I hated cooking in my family, especially of all meat products. And I just have memories of being forced to sit for hours if I don't finish the food on my plate. And basically every meal was a struggle. So your question, who was the best listener around the dinner table, is like it's a presupposition that there was any good listening there. But my recollection is that most of the time there was nothing related to listening happening at the dinner table and elsewhere.
I'm curious if you spent time in the IDF and what you learned about listening then.
I felt as an oddball and not being understood by most of the people around me. I have vague memory while I became a sergeant, and there was another sergeant in my unit that was into literature and poetry, and I had some rapport with him, but not really. It's like sharing information that we both found interesting, but I won't say listening. And then I had a brother of a friend from my cohort who was several years older than I, and he was already released from the army. And during vacations, for some reason, my friend introduced me to his older brother, and we conversed about literature, and he was a type of a listening person for me. I remember very clearly him sending me a letter to the army in which he cited the Hebrew translation of Shakespeare's sonnets. And it touched my heart. So there was somebody who was seeing me. Unfortunately, that person committed suicide maybe a couple years after he sent me this letter. So he was also a very sensitive person who didn't have the stamina to work out things and chose suicide.
As you're reflecting on the question I asked you, you took in a very deep breath. You had a very significant pause.
Both emotions, but I'm looking now, reflecting cognitively on this experience. It's just a reaffirmation for the story I'm telling myself, or as I remember myself as a young boy to all the way to being middle-aged, that I was not a good listener, and in that I contributed to having very little people listening to me. And I was surrounded by an environment that, regardless of my own contribution, didn't have the skill and was rather argumentative. Just remembering even the type of friendships, male friendships that I developed in my 20s, that they were all based on, let's see who is wiser here, and cracking jokes at the expense of each other in a way that was painful, but this was the thing I knew about friendship and connection. So your questions just, in addition to being painful to look at, are interesting in the sense that they help me get even a clearer picture about the way I was embedded in my immediate social network, both family, friends, in short, listening-deprived environments.
How would you rate Israel as a nation of people with regard to their listening?
I did an interesting type of search by key punching to search Google to look at the frequency of words in books. And the other one is trends, to look into what people are searching when they search the internet. And I key punch into them the words talking and listening in many languages. And I look at the ratio of the two. And what you find, for example, in English books is that talking is twice as likely to be printed than listening. And also about searching this word. And other languages are similar to English, but some languages, such as German and Hebrew, the ratio could be 10 for talking to 1 of listening. I think that the culture in Israel is very, very argumentative. In a way, it has positive aspects, that it makes you resilient and learning to listen to the core of the argument rather than the personal attack underneath it. the other side of it is that if I, for example, observe the television here versus in other countries, or the radio talk shows, the rate of interruptions is amazing. And we have jokes, say, about in academia about people coming to give a talk. They just present the title, and somebody in the audience start to say, "Well, I don't understand why you gave this title to your talk," and it starts an argument. And before you know it, the allotted time for the talk is over without the presenter ever being given the chance to present even the introduction. So I think it's just a gross generalization. Of course, there are amazing listeners in Israel, but I think the culture by and large is not respectful of listening.
I'm curious when your work in academia commenced around listening.
14 years ago, I was introduced to appreciative inquiry. And in this introduction, I was listened to with the question, "Could you please tell me a story about an event at work during which you felt full of life?" And I did tell a story. And I was startled because I realized how long ago it was that I felt full of life at work, and how busy I was at the current work then in proving how smart I am while pursuing things that intrinsically I didn't care for. And I was really killing myself. That event started a cascade or a process for me of reviewing my life, realizing how much sadness I had in me, and searching for a different way of life. Up to this point, I was working on the destructive effects of feedback on performance. And through this process that began 14 years ago, I realized that I was pursuing, for 20 years of my career, a search for the conditions under which feedback is destructive. And it was just telling the world, look, I've been a child in a house of Holocaust survivors, and I received a lot of feedback. I can tell you that it could be extremely debilitating. And then I collected data that showed that it was not only my impression, but that almost 40% of the experiments carried out in the 20th century on feedback effectiveness showed that following feedback, performance goes down, even if the feedback was positive. But then I realized that I was working on showing the world of the academia, your recommendation for managers, for educators, for whoever, just give feedback is unfounded. It's much more complex than you claim. And in many cases, it could have real harm. But then I realized that I was working on finding what doesn't work, what hurts. And I was not satisfied with it. At the same time, I allowed myself to start to go through personal growth activities. And apart from learning about appreciative inquiry and inventing my own extensions of some of their tools, I participated in 1 year of storytelling classes where people listened to me. I participated in 1 year of psychodrama where people listened to me. And then I took voice classes. That was really meaningful for me to find my physical, true voice and my physical voice change. I have to tell a short story about it. I went to this harsh old lady, immigrant from Estonia, to learn voice classes for the first time in my life at age 48. And she tells me these things, "Well, you use your false voice." And I want to tell you something. There are two types of apple trees in the world. One of them will give little sour green apples. And another one of them can give big, sweet, red apples. Now, I'm sorry to tell you, you have the trunk or the roots of a tree that is sour and green. You will never have a nice voice. But if you will pretend to produce red apples, you will give nothing. Only if you're trying to be true to your voice, then you'll be able to convince people with what you are saying. And let me tell you that there are some amazing people with amazing voices that come to my studio. And when you hear them the first 2 minutes, you are mesmerized. But later on, you get tired and bored because they have a nice voice, but they don't tell the truth. And then she gave me a name of another Israeli singer, and she said, well, he has a bad voice. But when he sings, everybody is attuned, not because he has a nice voice, because he tells the truth. So your ear is going after his voice. So these were the processes that I went through, and the change was so deep that my wife would say that it is as if I went through a religious conversion. Former student of mine said, what happened to you? I tell you, I swore when I met you first that I'll never have anything to do with you. It was impossible to be in the presence of your arrogance. I had to take your class because of my schedule, and I came in and I was surprised you so changed. What happened? I asked myself the same question. How could it be that the person during late middle age go through such a deep transformation? And the answer I gave myself is that I was so lucky to cultivate around me a collection of people who really listened to me in different forms and ways, but really listened to me. And I recognized that being listened to creates the space that gives you the freedom to change and to grow into your authentic self. And when I recognized that, I decided I will research listening.
As a result, you undertook some significant meta-analysis of listening. Help our audience understand the body of research you created around listening.
When I started about 2010 to search what is known about listening, I thought that there was almost nothing out there. And the reason is that if you search in academic search engines, research on listening, you're most likely to find nothing because it's hidden in tens of thousands of papers using the word listening not in the context we understand it, such as listening to English as a second language, such as computer protocols listening to the other computer, and you're most likely to conclude that there is nothing. I found 272 papers containing 307 studies reporting 930 different relationships of things with listening. And I decided to put an order on this diverse literature. You can find some writing about listening among nurses, some writing about listening among salespeople, among clinical psychologists, some about law enforcement, some about among developmental researchers studying how mothers listen to their child. And in every domain, there is relatively little, so you can't see the big picture. I decided I want to know the big picture. As a yardstick, I used other works that tells me that the average correlation found, say, in social psychology is 0.22, and that's based on several thousand papers sampling 8 million people. Okay, so I know that on average, when you study whatever you study in the social psychology, 0.22 is about the average effect. I look at the consequences first of listening. For example, how a listener like you, Oscar, influence the talking of the other person. And the correlation is 0.40 something. It's more than double than the typical correlation in the social sciences. That is, I found out that a listener shapes very strongly the quality of the talk of the other person. So speaking ability in large part is determined not by the person, but by the audience. Second, I was looking into variables that measure quality of relationship, such as trust, empathy, and the opposite side of it, lack or violence. That is, when there is no listening, the relationship is one of separating the two forces. So lack of violence. In every one of these domains, I get correlations that are either around 0.40 or close to 0.40, double of what is typically found in the social sciences. Next, I was asking myself, okay, I learned that one good listener will affect the quality of the speech of the other person, and as a result will create an encounter with trust, with empathy, with violent urges suppressed or muted. And I say, okay, what happens next? And then I found papers about the well-being of the speaker. And here the correlations are again above the mean in the social sciences. Good listeners will increase the well-being of the person, whether it was reducing depression, reducing anxiety, increasing a sense of meaning in life, and improving the coping skills of the other person. That is, you don't need to go to a psychologist, or you don't need to be a psychologist to give benefits to the well-being of other people around you. Just good listening can do it, and we can talk about what good listening is. But some of the other speakers in your program, in your podcast, have delineated what it might be. So I also compared, for example, the effect of listening on depression to the effects of drugs on depression. So relative to meta-analysis of the effects of pharmaceutical interventions on depression, listening is more powerful than drugs. So I'm not saying it's necessarily done on the same populations, but it's interesting to know that listening it could be better than drug in improving the well-being of people around you. In parentheses, exercise may be even better for depression than drugs and listening combined. But then I was looking at the cognitive processes of the speaker. And it's also coming with my research with former PhD students, especially with Guy Itzchakov, that if you listen to me, you will change my opinion about whatever I was talking about. And the mechanism works like this. Carl Rogers recognized that each of us have inside of our mind contradictions. Now, when I speak to you and you don't listen to me, I will present to you the strong part in me. And the more you argue with me, the more you will bolster my initial strong side, which will be presented verbally. But if you listen well to me, I will first present to you my strong side. And if you persist in listening, I will become aware of an inner contradiction, and I will present to you the counter argument. Another digression, I want to explain to the audience how does it work. I had a student in my office, and a former executive MBA student, who cheated on attendance sheet. He was absent from class, but somebody signed on his behalf. And he came to my office, and I asked him openly, so what's up? And he started with saying, your office clerks are really bad. And I just reflected what he said, that they are not good because A, B, and C. And then I asked him, what else? And he said, well, Professor Kluger, there's something wrong with you too. And I just reflected that, well, I said, I hear you saying that I'm not okay because A, B, and C. And what else? Now I'm talking 40 minutes into the conversation. He says, well, I guess I'm no little bandit either, meaning I've done something wrong. So he's coming into my office with one major idea that he's right and nobody sees what's wrong around. And just by listening, he recognized that something is wrong with him. This is very hard to own this type of thoughts. And a good listener can do that. I found out that on average, again, the effect of a listener on changing the mind of the speaker rather than arguing is larger than the average in the social sciences. And last, maybe most relevant to your audience, I asked the question, okay, so what's the relationship between listening and outcome for the listener? So first, a summary of some 30 studies relating listening to actual job performance or objective measures of performance show a correlation above this average. That is, good listeners are better performers. And among the studies that I've used for the meta-analysis, salespeople that listen better sell more. Physicians who listen better are less likely to be sued for malpractice. Detectives who listen better are more likely to make the person being interrogated reveal new information to the police. Teachers who report that the school principal is a better listener are working in schools in which the students get higher scores on national standardized exams. And in workplaces where workers report that the manager is a better listener, there are less reports of accidents that must be reported to authorities. And the list goes on and on and on. So you, as a manager, if you listen better, or as a worker, you're likely to improve your own performance. But let's move on. Maybe the strongest correlation I found is between subordinates' perception of the listening of the manager and how much people leadership skill they attribute to their leader. The correlation is getting close to 0.6. Never in my career have I seen such a correlation. It's based on 17 studies across 8,000 employees. The better you listen to your subordinates, the more they will believe that you are a person who could lead people. And interestingly, it's not related to the perception of how well you know to organize the tasks. So I'm not implying that listening is a remedy for all managerial issues, but like one important aspect of leadership is intimately related to the listening of the manager.
I think many people who run companies struggle with the constant chatter that we carry in our brains, and we don't allow ourselves the time to actually practice deep listening. What Oscar does is he eloquently outlines strategies to manage that struggle between feeling like we should be leading when we'd actually probably achieve more from listening. It's relevant, it's practical, insightful, and I think most of all, it makes you reconsider what listening actually is.
Finally, I can tell from this meta-analysis that I found that personality is much lesser of a predictor of your listening than environmental factors such as distraction, like your cell phone and your computer screen, and training. It is possible to train people to become better listeners, and the effects are also pretty large. It has really serious consequences. So if you're a manager in authority, you may want to consider training your staff and being trained with them in improving the listening in your team and to your customers, colleagues, and whomever. So this is just the tip of the iceberg of the findings in my meta-analysis.
What are the 3 things you think delineate good listening?
When you enter a conversation with the decision to be there for the other, everything else will flow from this decision. I just finished teaching an executive MBA of 52 students, and the class was cynical from the very beginning towards my messages and my exercises that involved listening to each other, telling meaningful stories, learning to ask for meaningful stories, helping the other work through two sides of an inner conflict and respecting both sides equally. And I had a lot of resistance in this class, but I was firm. I most strongly remember a case that a woman in class said that what she learned from that particular meeting is that she shapes the identity of the people she listens to. And she has a son with speech impediments that is very hard for her to listen to. And she was saying, I learned it today that I need to collect my energy and to listen to my son for him having a better future. And then another student in the class said, I don't understand this nonsense and why we need listening in this class and why we do it in a management course. And I don't find it useful at all. And then other students in the class attacked him. And then I intervened and I thanked that student for the courage of telling his own truth. I'm trying to say that at that moment, and not always I succeed, I was true to my decision to listen to in a way that will support the well-being of anyone that is in the space. And I didn't see the benefits of that. Like, I talked to the student after class and I again thanked him and I reassured him that it was right for him to share whatever was his experience. And the class job is to learn to respect both those that find the listening very useful and those that find it very annoying. Only in the very last class, when I felt that I'm about to cry from it, and I don't know why, that I felt, well, maybe this class was a lost cause and for some reason it didn't work well. I asked every one of the 52 students to complete the sentence, from this class I learned that, or I became aware of, or I hated this. And one student said, maybe the last 6 or 7 students to talk, I want to apologize to you that I was so cynical throughout the semester, and it was not the same person as the student who find it listening unuseful. And now I recognize that I missed a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to remedy whatever will be possible in the remainder of the final paper. And for me, this is a story about what it takes to make this decision. If you make this decision to listen, the way I defined it, you're likely to fail oftentimes. You're likely to be presented with sometimes with really aggressive resistance. Granted, at times you will get such levels of thank yous and appreciation that it may melt your heart, but it is not guaranteed. It's a choice you make because you believe it's the right thing for people to be listened to. But so many people, perhaps so hurt as I am, if not even more, will not succumb to being listened to unless they feel very, 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 very safe. And to create this space, it may take a long time.
What would be the 3 tips you would pass on to those listening to improve their listening in the next couple of days?
The first thing is commit yourself to listen to 3 people who you find very hard to listen to, while telling them that you're asking a favor to practice your own listening, and that you will put a timer during which you will not respond at all, and just ask them the favor of telling you whatever they need to tell you. And you decide how long can you do that. Even if you start with 3 minutes, that will be fantastic. But you can try 5 minutes and could find even 8. And I send people to do it with a worker that they don't like or with their spouse. And most people come with interesting insights about it. First, on how difficult it is for them to shut up, or how difficult it may be for some people to continue talking when you just look at them benevolently, but waiting for them to talk. My second tip is, the next time you feel that somebody that is talking to you or that the conversation is stuck and you're in a loop, that everybody's repeating what they're saying and you've said already what you meant and the other party said what he or she meant and you still go on, if you recognize that, stop and try to put a name to the feeling of the other person. For example, said, well, I guess you are frustrated, or I guess, and I emphasize the word guess because you don't know how the other person is feeling, but you guess. Just name the emotion that is present in the room. This often leads to change in the conversation, to the real needs of the parties involved. And the last tip is try it. Once your partner finishes talking, don't answer. Before that, ask, is there anything else? Is there more? And wait, because sometimes people said no. And if you wait another 10 seconds, they said, but actually, and then they will open the much more interesting thing that they have to say. So just, is there anything else? So simple to say, so hard to put in practice. These are my 3 tips. I find interesting in my research is the following question. If listening is so useful as I describe it, why is it that we need to talk about it here? Why isn't everyone listening so well? And I think that understanding the obstacles for listening will help us enjoy the benefits of listening. And among my answers are, Carl Rogers talked about it. If you really listen, you'll have to change. And that's dangerous because the entire way you see things may flip on you. For example, a very senior manager in my class did the exercise of 5 minutes listening to a subordinate. And this subordinate, he thought that she really didn't care about her job because for the 3 years that she was working with him, every now and then she will cut early and ignore his request to finish the work on that day. And she said, I need to go, and that's it. And he just stopped and listened. He found out that she's taking care of a retarded sibling and that she needs to take him from one place to another on those days. He had no clue for 3 years. Then he thought of himself that I'm a people person. Then he had to face the fact that someone had such a personal issue for 3 years and he didn't have a clue. So in one way, it's better that you don't listen, because if you would, 2 things will happen for you. 1, you'll recognize things that maybe you don't want to recognize. And 2, you may need to change both your thinking and your action. And it doesn't stop here, because some people that even if you listen to them, they will not reward you for that. My research with Dotan Castro have revealed that people high in avoidance attachment style, people that grew up with difficulty in creating intimacy, and that could be a third of the healthy population. When we listen to them, they don't feel comfortable because they infer that you're trying to be intimate with them. And I'm not talking about sexual intimacy, just person-to-person human touch. And we found out that it does not make them feel safe when somebody tries to listen to them. That the fact that you don't listen well is not because you're a bad person. It is because you have some needs that you either know to address without listening, or you don't know how to address them with listening. I thank you for the inner place from which you are asking the questions. This is one of the secrets that I have no clue how to get it, but I have a sense that such a meaningful conversation as the one that you developed with me is possible only when you, as the listener, is finding in himself or herself a place some people call the knowing self, the wise self, or Gandlin called the felt sense. It's a sacred place inside of our mind that is open for the possibilities in the other and in the connection to the other. So I thank you for bringing this amazing quality to our meeting, because me too, I'm going out of this conversation feeling blessed to have had this conversation with you.
My friend Shalom, I'm curious if you improve the way I ask questions for the audience for the next interviews, if you've got any observations you make about my listening.
I think that you are an amazing listener, and my hunch is to not be worried about any particular question, but keep cultivating your amazing ability to find the place in yourself to be with the other. What was the most moving piece of this talk for you? And reflecting on this most moving piece or aspect of this talk, what can you do about it in the next few days?
Deep listening.
Écoute attentive.
Bene ascoltare.
Ukulalela fieleja.
It's so hard to summarize this episode, so I'll talk about what I learnt and what I applied as a result of listening to Avi. My listening influences the speaker. My listening influences the speaker more deeply than I ever imagined. And my listening can create a massive difference in those I listen to, as well as those who listen to them as I influence their thinking. I thought about a pebble dropping in a lake and creating these concentric rings that ripple out in the world. I loved Avi's passion, his deep exploration of the science and all the research he's done into listening. So much paper, I'm imagining, books and books. So what have I applied as a result of listening to Avi? This has been really hard for me, because what I've had to do is start to listen to radio shows, TV shows, and podcasts that I passionately disagree with. And this has been really hard for me. But what it has done, as Avi said, as Carl Rogers has said, if you really want to listen, you really need to be willing to change. And it's in exposing myself to other ideas, I have a broader perspective on the world. I'm a little less judgmental. My top tip that I took out of this today was, when you listen and simply say the words, "Is there anything else?" until they say the words, "But actually what this really is about," or, "You know what I really want to say?" What I actually mean is these three key phrases have become more obvious to me in conversations as I prompt the question, is there anything else? I wonder how your thinking and that of the speaker will become different if you simply say the words, "Is there anything else?" To the team that listens to me, a big thank you to Nell, to June, to Jenny, and to Johnny. Thank you in helping on our quest to create 100 million deep listeners in the world. Thanks for listening.
Deep listening.
Deep listening. Lurj Lasell.
Deep listening.
Deep listening.
Whakarongo Pohonu.
Deep listening. Impact beyond words.